looking for escapism, I just want to escape.
Welcome back to my disembodied voice. Well, it's time for another clinical case study, and what better person than the character of one of the best fallen arcs of all time, Anakin Skywalker. Now, we all know Anakin becomes Darth Vader, so this video is going to focus on the prequel trilogy, and we're going to look at his motivations for his emotional turmoil, the reason he was so susceptible to the dark side, and even look at a possible diagnosis for the Chosen One. Anyway, let's crack on. First things first. Anakin Skywalker was discovered on Tatooine by Qui-Gon Jinn, who noticed that this boy was very force sensitive. Aged just 9 years old and living as a slave with his mother Shmi Skywalker, Anakin had a high concentration of something called midichlorians. Now, the name midichlorians probably isn't accidental and more than likely has a relation with something called the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria is what many scientists believe that all life started from, and without turning this into a TED talk, which I wouldn't do very well at, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of all cellular life. Mitochondria break down glucose into an energy molecule known as adenosine triphosphate, which is used to fuel various other cellular processes. The other part of the word midichlorian allegedly comes from the word chloroplast, and the chloroplasts are responsible for the biosynthesis of active compounds such as amino acids, phytohormones, nucleotides, vitamins, lipids, and secondary metabolites. Now, mitochondria and chloroplasts were once free living cells which ended up inside each other, and, whether by cannibalizing or merely by being parasitical, life was engendered through endosymbiosis. Anyway, all that explains our midichlorian name, and these midichlorians made Anakin via virgin birth.
That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Anyway, we find him as a 9-year-old gifted pilot who is kind, brave, altruistic, magnanimous, and also very curious. So how did this little boy become the most feared villain in the universe in just 3 movies? Well, to start this journey, we need to look at what Qui-Gon's choice to remove Anakin from his mother and take him to Jedi school did to this young boy's psychology. Okay, now I know that Qui-Gon tried to free both Anakin and his mother, but Watto completely refused to let 2 slaves go. But Anakin's descent into the dark side really begins here when he was taken from Shmi, and so we're going to look at the psychodynamics, personality distortion, and havoc of attachment theory that an only child would face when torn from his loving, emotionally sustaining, and devoted maternal nest. So, first things first, let's look at attachment theory and apply it to Anakin's formative years, personality growth, and emotional stability. Anakin is 9 years old when he's taken from his mother. He has spent his life as a slave with very few familiar people around him. These people have been a constant, and he is very close with his mother. Anakin has spent all of his formative years with only one parent, and, therefore, all of Anakin's pre-morbid personality traits, which is basically who Anakin was up until Qui-Gon meets him, so his values have been formed within the 4 subphases of the separation individuation phase and focused around one person. The separation individuation phase of childhood is the name given to the process of which an individual maps the self and all others and the world around them, and it was coined by Margaret Mailer, and it has 4 distinct phases. Number 1, differentiation. The first stage of differentiation, also called hatching, spans 4 to 10 months of age. Spending much of its life asleep, this stage consists of visual and tactile exploration of the caregiver's face and body. It is the beginning of peekaboo games and also physical separation through crawling away, venturing back, and playing nearby. Throughout this process, infants engage in a visual checking back with the caregiver, which serves the developmental function of discriminating the familiar from the unfamiliar. Number 2, practicing. The practicing subphase occurs from about 6 to 10 months and up to 18 months of age. In the early practicing subphase, which overlaps differentiation, the infant is able to move away from the caretaker by crawling, climbing, and pulling itself back up and holding on to a supporting object. During its explorations, the infant checks back to the caregiver to emotionally refuel, and it uses the caregiver as a secure base. It's believed the early formulations of narcissistic personality disorder start in the practicing phase. Number 3. Rapprochement. The period of rapprochement spans the ages of approximately 15 to 24 months and is characterised behaviourally by an active approach to return to the caregiver. Children begin to realise the limits of their omnipotence and have a new awareness of their separateness and the separateness of the caregiver. Increases in cognition and motor development lead to ambitendency, shadowing and darting away from the caretaker only to return. It's believed by many medical professionals that emotionally unstable personality disorder starts in the rapprochement subphase. Number 4. Consolidation. This period spans the ages of 24 to 36 months and involves all aspects of the previous stages. Children, by now, have an inner picture and relationship with the caregiver which has formed as a result of the soothing and organising functions that the caregiver provides. Internalisation is the process of recovering what has been lost in the actual relationship with the mother so that the toddlers can carry around an internal picture of a gratifying mother that is now part of their internal structure. Anakin has completed all of these phases and also moved through his formative years, which go to the age of 8, and these are the years in which a child experiences rapid cognitive, intellectual, social, emotional and physical development. So, by the time Qui-Gon meets him, he is stable, developed, and his personality structure has a good object constancy, which means he has a healthy relationship with his mother and he doesn't fear any abandonment. Now, for all of us, events that provoke anxiety do so because they create a demand which is greater than our capacity or because they undermine our feelings of security and comfort. Now, we either cope with these or we develop generalised defensive strategies which are about diminishing the feelings which upset us. And it's here that Anakin is about to have his personality warped as a naive Qui-Gon takes him from his beloved mother without considering the ramifications of what will happen to him and how he will introject and perceive his new separation anxiety. By the way, introject quite literally means to put inside. And remember, all generalised defensive strategies are emotional disruptors. So, to become a Jedi, Anakin leaves Tatooine and heads off in a spaceship. Jake Lloyd, the actor, plays this bit quite well as it's all about excitement and opportunity without really understanding the consequences of what is going to happen. Now, there is every possibility that this separation from his mother and introduction to a strange cult and then rejection of said cult, when I say cult, I'm referring to the Jedi and I also mean Yoda's and Mace Windu's rejection of letting him train, all means Anakin will start to form the symptoms of emotionally unstable personality disorder. Now, emotionally unstable personality disorder officially starts in children between the ages of 7 to 13 who have either been separated or completely lose attachment of their most solid object constancy, their parent or parents, following their emotional and cognitive childhood development through all the stages listed above. I did mention earlier that the rapprochement subphase is part of emotionally unstable personality. However, Anakin bonded to his mother during this phase, so it's highly unlikely it would have started then. Now, I did a deep dive into emotionally unstable personality disorder in the Greta case study, so, as I don't want to repeat myself, let's just get a nutshell overview of emotionally unstable personality disorder. First of all, let's refresh our memories on what personality is and how we get a personality disorder. Personality describes the unique patterns of thoughts, feelings and behaviours that distinguish a person from others. A product of both biology and environment, it remains fairly consistent throughout life. Basically, it's who we are, it's how we act, but when we go through separation and trauma or suffer loss or abuse, our personality can be warped and we get something called a personality disorder. And when we come to personality disorders, we have the definition from personality disorder expert Theodore Millen. Personality disorders should not be understood as mental illness, but as styles of behaviour, cognition and emotion that imply inflexibility, which limits the acquisition of new behaviours, and difficulties to handle stressful situations besides promoting vicious circles of functioning. Basically, they're ingrained maladaptive patterns. So, emotionally unstable personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image, and emotions, as well as marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following symptoms. And we will highlight the symptoms young Anakin has across the 3 films. Chronic feelings of emptiness. Emotional instability in reaction to day-to-day events, e.g. intense episodic sadness, irritability, or anxiety, usually lasting a few hours and only rarely more than a few days. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Anakin does have this symptom. Identity disturbance with markedly or persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. Yes, Anakin has this. Impulsive behaviour in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging, e.g. spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. Anakin does do reckless things. Inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, e.g. frequent displays of temper, constant anger or recurrent physical fights. Anakin has this symptom. A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by extremes between idealization and devaluation, known as splitting. Anakin does this, and we will cover this later. Recurrent suicidal behavior gestures, threats, or self-harming behavior. Transient, stress-related, paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms, of which Anakin has this. So there's a definite criteria there which gives us an idea that Anakin could have emotionally unstable personality disorder, but there's another personality disorder which I think Anakin has and is much more appropriate, and we'll come to that in a little bit. Now, when we meet Anakin in episodes 2 and 3, he's clearly showing signs of the symptoms of emotionally unstable personality disorder more than he does, obviously, in episode 1. Now remember, Anakin has been taken from his mother, and although he agreed to this as it was exciting, his brain connections weren't fully formed enough to make the necessary adjustments and calculations to how this would affect him, and by the time we meet him in Attack of the Clones, episode 2, he is showing strong signs of the emotionally unstable personality disorder subtype, the discouraged. But what is the discouraged emotionally unstable personality type? Okay, let's have a look. So, the discouraged EUPD has traits of avoidant, depressive and dependent features. They are pliant, submissive, loyal, but feel in constant jeopardy. They are hopeless and can feel powerless. Remember what Yoda says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Anakin hides a lot of fear that he isn't good enough, won't be able to save his loved ones, and that Obi-Wan is holding him back and he cannot control things, and this is what starts his descent. He dreams of his mother and she dies by the hands of the Sand People, and this affects Anakin deeply. By episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, he actively seeks out Palpatine and explains he cannot lose Padme as well, and he is told the story about Darth Plagueis the Wise and how he cheated death. When the Emperor is threatened, Anakin kills Mace Windu in desperation, not evil, because he is desperate to keep Palpatine alive to help him save Padme, because he can't face losing another loved one. Anakin is in constant jeopardy, constant panic, constant fears of abandonment. So, despite all his power and all his rage, Anakin is frightened, hopeless and stuck in perpetual jeopardy. So, living in a state of perpetual anxiety, already having lost his mother, and now convinced to the point of neurosis that Padme is going to die, he does what all emotionally unstable personality disorders do when faced with overwhelming stress. They use a psychological defense mechanism called splitting. So, what is splitting? Let me tell you. Splitting means to divide something. It causes a person to view everything and everyone in black and white, absolute terms. Remember, only a Sith deals in absolutes. And it stops them from being able to recognise or accept paradoxical qualities in someone or something, and doesn't allow for any grey areas in their thinking. In other words, people are always perfect or evil. It's right or it's wrong. They are loving or never loving. We all know people are dynamic. Someone like your mom, might snap at you one day or shout at you. Doesn't mean she doesn't love you. It just means that at that moment she's cross. There's a grey area. She still loves you unconditionally and will take a bullet for you. But for Anakin in that situation, that person hates him. There's no in between. They shouted, they hate me. And he has that feeling towards everything, abandonment, love. It's all split. It's either all or nothing. Anakin does not have the personality substrates in the functional or structural domains because his childhood development wasn't completed and he was taken from his mother and that object constancy. Then, in The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon dies and he loses his new mentor. So at this point, Obi-Wan takes over and Anakin loves him but keeps splitting whenever frustrated or frightened. In episode 2, Anakin shouts about Obi-Wan holding him back and not trusting him, and this came after earlier periods where he has shown absolute faith in his master, regardless what's going on. Then, when Palpatine is about to die at the hands of Mace Windu, Anakin acts impulsively to save him, and even though Palpatine is evil and Anakin isn't at that point, Anakin has acted because he's frightened of losing Padme and the skills Palpatine is going to teach him. So, now offering himself unconditionally, he kneels down, says, "What have I done?" but knows he had no choice because he cannot face losing Padme. Anakin then partakes in the Jedi massacre and he turns to the dark side, and his thoughts now officially lose any capacity for nuance. Everything is now all or nothing. There is no grey area. He will do what must be done. Emotionally unstable personality disorders think in extremes and, when splitting, their world ends if they cannot see life with someone or they think someone is going to leave them. Poor emotional regulation, no object constancy and no sense of self because there has been no introjection of self-esteem from a loving parent consistently. Their feelings of insecurity increase, they see nothing but the end, and during these states of high expressed emotion, people are categorised into all good and all bad. And due to a lack of internal structures, the emotionally unstable personality disorder tends to be hostile, violent, and aggressive. And these are all negative qualities that Anakin is sliding into now he's under lots of stress. However, as I said before, I don't think emotionally unstable personality disorder is Anakin's main problem. I think we have another personality disorder which could answer why Anakin is like he is. And I'm talking about dependent personality disorder. So what is dependent personality disorder? Well, let's look at it in a nutshell. Dependent personality disorder, an excessive and pervasive need to be taken care of with submissive, clinging and needy behaviour due to fear of abandonment. Dependent personality disorder is a personality disorder characterised by clingy and submissive behaviour. Individuals are passive and allow others to direct their lives because they are unable to do it themselves. And this may be expressed by difficulty making routine decisions without input, reassurance and advice from others. Requires others to assume responsibilities which they should be attending to. Fear of disagreeing with others and risking disapproval. Difficulty starting projects without the support of others. Excessive need to obtain nurturance and support from others, even allowing others to impose themselves rather than risk rejection or disapproval. Feeling vulnerable or helpless when alone. Desperately seeking another relationship when one ends. And unrealistic preoccupation with being left alone and unable to care for themselves. Now, in terms of emotionally unstable personality disorder, Anakin has the dependent subtype. So, what are the subtypes of dependent personality disorder and which one would Anakin have? Number 1, disquieted with avoidant features. The person is relentlessly perturbed, disconnected and fretful. They feel foreboding, vulnerable and fear abandonment. They are lonely unless they are near supporting figures. Number 2, selfless with depressive features. Merges and becomes immersed with another. They are engulfed, enshrouded and give themselves entirely to someone else. Number 3, immature, the variant of pure dependent pattern. They are unsophisticated, half-grown, childlike, gullible, incapable of adult responsibilities. Number 4, accommodating with masochistic features. They are gracious, neighbourly, agreeable. They deny their own feelings and adopt a submissive role. Number 5, ineffectual with schizoid features. They are unproductive, gainless, incompetent, useless, and they refuse to deal with difficulties. Anakin shows strong, immature and selfless characteristics. He leaves his mother and joins the Jedi cult, but obsessed with Padme, she becomes his new female focus. Now, Anakin in episode 1 is too young to be thinking about unbuckling Padme's corset, but with his mother figure removed, Padme takes over the role of strong mothering female and he fuses to her. Then he leaves Padme for Jedi school and bonds with Obi-Wan, but when he meets Padme again and his balls have dropped, he struggles with the idea of Jedi celibacy and attaches to her again. By this point, he's getting frustrated with Obi-Wan, and it becomes apparent after his mother dies. Deeply in love with Padme, he marries her in secret with his robot arm. I bet that was fun on the wedding night. But then falls into the emotional instability that Padme will also die, and he gives himself completely to the Emperor to stop this. The reason Anakin is dependent here, despite the psychological splitting, is that he has to be with someone at all times. Since being taken from his mother, he's gone from Qui-Gon, Padme, Obi-Wan, Padme, Emperor. He's always got to be really close and bonded with someone. Obi-Wan is his best friend, Padme is his wife, and when faced with being alone and losing Padme, he willingly and masochistically gives himself to the Emperor. Anakin is tortured about killing Mace Windu and saving the Emperor, but if the Emperor dies and takes his secretive cheating death with him, Anakin has to change completely as he cannot face the prospect of being alone. So, from being torn away from his mother and thus having his self-esteem malformed, his object constancy punctured and his emotional regulation torn in half, Anakin isn't mentally ill. His personality and self-construct is just completely nebulous. Remember what personality disorder expert Theodore Millen said about personality. Personality disorders should not be understood as mental illness, but as styles of behaviour, cognition, and emotion that imply inflexibility, which limits the acquisition of new behaviours and difficulties to handle stressful situations, besides promoting vicious circles of functioning. Now, I know I keep repeating that definition, but it's really important that we separate Anakin from things like psychopathy, sociopathy, and look at his personality to why he is why he is. So, with all these events occurring beyond his maturity and mental capacity, Anakin's coping mechanisms, especially after being taken away from his mother and taken to a strange cult in a citywide planet, have formed maladaptively, and he handles all stress with dysregulated, unstable emotions and the cognitive inflexibility of being terrified and being left alone. Anakin is immature, gullible, and incapable of taking adult responsibilities. He breaks the Jedi code, snaps at the council, bonds with Palpatine, who represents the father figure he never had, and, when convinced that Padme is going to die, he will ruin his life just so he can keep hold of her, rather than accept his visions may be wrong, rationalise that loss is part of life, and have some Jedi faith in himself, and focus on what he can control, rather than panicking about what he cannot control. And it's the same for me and you. There are always things we can control, and there are always things we cannot control, and acceptance is our mediation between these two extremes. The black and white of what we can and cannot control is mediated by the grey of acceptance and emotional resilience. Anakin does not have this grey area. Dependent personality disorders look inside themselves and see inadequacy and worthlessness, and despite Anakin shouting about he will be the strongest and best ever Jedi in episode 2, he doesn't really believe this and has internalised Chancellor Palpatine's grooming and conditioning. Often apologising or seeking reassurance from Obi-Wan, his petulance comes out when given the alternative from Palpatine that he's better than the rest of them. As I said before, Palpatine is a father figure, and Anakin has grown up without a father, due to his virgin birth.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
And children without father figures are known to have behavioural problems, as they have more difficulties with social adjustment and are more likely to report problems with friendships, manifest behavioural problems, and many develop a swaggering, intimidating persona in an attempt to disguise their underlying fears, resentments, anxieties, and unhappiness. Children with poor father figures are also statistically more prone to substance abuse and emotional problems. Anakin has swagger, aggression, and a poor temperament, but deep down he is lonely, scared, and terrified of being abandoned. So, even in his most braggadocio and bravado of displays. He is compensating for inside insecurities. George Lucas's decision to take Anakin as a young boy and remove him from his mother was a really good point to start the character from, and I'm not saying George is a psychologist, but he was aware that all dark side deviations start from the nurturing, imprinting, bonding, object constancy and attachment stages in life. Or, to put it in other words, the separation individuation phase that we talked about in the earlier part of this video essay. For dependent personality disorders, they have a defense mechanism called introjection, where they need to fuse with someone. For Anakin, it's Obi-Wan, Padme, and then Palpatine. And introjection is where, after looking inside themselves and seeing weakness and fear, they put the other person's identity inside them and then grow a symbiotic self-esteem, which is just parasitical and unnatural. This is best exemplified with, after turning against the Jedi cult, Anakin puts all Palpatine's beliefs, ideologies and philosophies inside his own mind and, now imbibed with the dark side, takes the Sith mantra completely. And as a child with emotionally unstable personality disorder and dependent personality disorder characteristics, absolutes and extremes are what Anakin would be most comfortable with and, as Obi-Wan says, only a Sith deals in absolutes. Immature, naive, submissive, labile, petulant, the list goes on, and all of these qualities make Anakin someone susceptible to extreme idealization and devaluation. However, dependent personality disorders are mostly warm and loving creatures, so, if that's the case, why is Anakin such a dick by the end of episode 3? Well, that depends on who they fuse to, but also remember that Anakin was loving to Padme and did all these horrible things to save Padme. Yes, he tried to force choke her at the end of Revenge of the Sith, but this was after she rejected him. And for someone with such poor emotional regulation and a malformed ego, which also has narcissistic traits, being told your ideal partner wants nothing to do with you is only going to cause more splitting, projection, and when the idealised person abandons the emotionally unstable / dependent, the blame is only heading one way, no matter what the context. Anakin also fuses to Palpatine because Palpatine says he can depend on him, save Padme and open up his world. Padme refuses to accept this, so she gets the full force of a rejected and malformed ego of poor self-esteem and poor personality construct via a damn good force choking. So, could Anakin be a psychopath? Absolutely not. Anakin is desperate to be loved and he is in love. He isn't a monster in a skin suit and he isn't treating people like toys for his own selfish gains. He is also so conflicted when killing Dooku and chopping Windu's hand off, and this shows his capacity for right and wrong. Anakin is always torn. Even when killing Dooku, he questions the act as it's not the Jedi way. And being torn and uncertain and then fusing to someone who persuades him or who he idolises is the running theme of his fallen character arc. Also, in terms of his lack of sociopathy or psychopathy, Anakin bonded with his loving mother when he was young and loved Padme with all his true heart, formed friendships, and only turned to the dark side to save his true love from a belief that tragedy was coming. He shows empathy, kindness and consideration, and most of all, doesn't just use people for his own gain. He even shows true disgust and horror when he slices Mace Windu's hand off. Anakin doesn't possess the triad of symptoms, which are bedwetting, cruelty to animals, and fire starting, which are all incredibly relevant to psychopathy, and his rise to the top isn't really Machiavellian, it's just desperate, reactive, and fearful of being alone and unable to face life without the person he fused himself to. He is truly an emotionally unstable and also dependent person who just wants to be loved. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Remember, psychology is cool, so please like, share and subscribe, and even leave a comment or a suggestion for a future video or case study, and until next time, I'll catch you later.
That's my story and I'm sticking to it.